I've never been one to indulge in New Year's resolutions. The idea of making promises to myself only to break them a month later always seemed pointless. But this year was different. I was determined to start fresh, leave the past behind, and embrace a new beginning. Little did I know that the past had other plans. My name is Alex, and I moved to a small town in the middle of nowhere to escape the chaos of city life. The town, with its quaint charm and friendly locals, seemed like the perfect place to rebuild. I found a small house on the outskirts, surrounded by dense woods that added to its serene isolation. The house was old but sturdy, and the rent was surprisingly affordable. The landlord, a grizzled man named Mr. Harris, seemed eager to get someone in quickly. I didn't question it. I needed a change, and this place felt right. As New Year's Eve approached, the townsfolk buzzed with excitement. They spoke of a grand celebration in the town square, complete with fireworks, music, and dancing. I decided to attend, hoping to immerse myself in the community and shake off the lingering shadows of my past. The evening started wonderfully. The square was lit with twinkling lights, and the air was filled with laughter and the smell of roasting chestnuts. I mingled, danced, and for the first time in a long while, felt a sense of belonging. Midnight approached, and we gathered for the countdown. As the clock struck 12, fireworks exploded in the sky, and the crowd erupted in cheers. It was magical. But then, as the last firework faded, something strange happened. The crowd fell silent, and an eerie hush settled over the square. I felt a sudden chill, the kind that crawls up your spine and makes your hair stand on end. The townspeople's faces turned somber, almost fearful, as they stared at the old church at the edge of the square. I followed their gaze and saw a figure standing in the doorway, cloaked in shadows. "Who is that?" I asked a nearby woman, but she just shook her head and muttered, "It's starting again." Before I could ask what she meant, the figure disappeared and the festivities resumed, though with a palpable undercurrent of unease. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to me like a second skin. I decided to leave early and head back home. The path through the woods was dark and silent, save for the crunch of snow beneath my boots. As I neared my house, I noticed something strange. The front door, which I was certain I had locked, was slightly ajar. I hesitated, heart pounding, before stepping inside. The house was cold and dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the windows. I called out, but there was no answer. I quickly checked each room, finding nothing out of place, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. I locked the door and double-checked the windows before heading to bed, though sleep eluded me. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whispering. I strained to listen, convinced it was just my mind playing tricks, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to come from the basement. Grabbing a flashlight, I crept down the creaky stairs, the whispers growing louder with each step. They were unintelligible, but filled with a malice that made my skin crawl. I reached the basement door, hesitated, then flung it open. The whispers stopped abruptly, plunging the basement into an oppressive silence. I shone the flashlight around, revealing nothing but old furniture and cobwebs. As I turned to leave, the light caught something on the far wall, a message, scratched into the wood. My blood ran cold as I read the words, "It's not over." I bolted upstairs, slamming the door behind me. Sleep was impossible, and I spent the rest of the night in the living room, clutching a kitchen knife. Morning brought little relief. I tried to go about my day, but the unease lingered. I decided to visit the town library, hoping to find some answers about the house and its previous occupants. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Harlow, was hesitant to speak at first, but when I told her about the message, her expression turned grave. She led me to a back room filled with old town records and newspapers. "Your house," she said, "has a dark history. 30 years ago, a family lived there, father, mother, and 2 children. On New Year's Eve, the father went mad and killed his family before taking his own life. Since then, every tenant who's lived there has experienced strange occurrences, especially around New Year's." My stomach churned as I processed her words. Why didn't anyone tell me? The landlord is desperate to keep the house occupied. He doesn't believe in the curse, or at least he pretends not to. I left the library with a sense of dread. The day passed in a blur, and as night fell, the fear returned. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion eventually claimed me. I woke to the sound of footsteps. Groggy and disoriented, I stumbled out of bed, clutching the flashlight. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the house. I followed them to the basement door, now wide open. Summoning all my courage, I descended the stairs. The basement was colder than before, and the whispers had returned, louder and more menacing. The message on the wall seemed to glow in the dim light. I approached it, heart racing, and suddenly, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was the man from the town square, his eyes filled with a sorrowful rage. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "This is my home," he replied, his voice a haunting echo. "You can never escape the past." I stumbled back, tripping over an old chair. As I hit the ground, the figure lunged at me. I screamed, and everything went black. I woke up in the hospital, confused and disoriented. Mr. Harris stood by my bed, his face etched with concern. "They found you in the basement," he said quietly. "You were alone, but the police heard you screaming." I wanted to tell him about the figure, the whispers, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I moved out of the house as soon as I was discharged. The townsfolk were sympathetic, but I could see the relief in their eyes. The curse had not claimed another victim, at least not completely. I've moved back to the city now, leaving that nightmare behind. But every New Year's Eve I hear the whispers, reminding me that the past is never truly gone. It lingers in the shadows, waiting, watching, ready to claim what it's owed. Every New Year's Eve, my friends and I had a tradition. We'd gather at a different abandoned place each year, tell ghost stories, drink, and wait for midnight to usher in the new year. It was all fun and games, a way to scare ourselves and then laugh it off. This year, we decided to explore the old asylum on the outskirts of town. It had been closed down decades ago, rumored to be haunted by the spirits of the patients who had suffered and died there. The asylum was a crumbling relic, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. As we approached, the air grew colder and an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. There were 5 of us. Me, my best friend Mike, his girlfriend Jenna, and our friends Sam and Lisa. Armed with flashlights and a backpack full of snacks and drinks, we stepped through the broken gates and into the asylum grounds. The place was eerie, even more so than the usual abandoned spots we'd visited. The silence was thick, as if the building itself held its breath, waiting. We found a room on the 2nd floor that still had most of its walls intact and set up camp there. We sat in a circle, passing around a bottle of cheap champagne as Mike started telling the first story. It was a typical ghost story about a nurse who had gone mad and killed her patients before hanging herself. We all laughed nervously, the sound echoing off the walls. But as the night wore on, the laughter faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Strange noises echoed through the halls, creaks, whispers, and the occasional distant scream. We brushed it off as the wind or animals, but deep down, we all felt it. Something was wrong. Around 11 p.m., Sam suggested we explore the basement, rumored to be the most haunted part of the asylum. The others were hesitant, but I didn't want to appear scared. I grabbed my flashlight and led the way, the others following reluctantly. The basement was a maze of narrow corridors and small, dark rooms. The air was damp and musty, and the walls were lined with old, rusty pipes. As we ventured deeper, the temperature dropped, and the whispers grew louder, almost as if they were following us. "Did you hear that?" Lisa whispered, clutching Mike's arm. "Probably just rats," he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. We turned a corner and found ourselves in a large open room. At the center was an old operating table, its surface stained with rust and who knew what else. Chains hung from the ceiling, swaying gently as if moved by an unseen force. "This is freaky," Jenna said, her eyes wide. "Maybe we should go back." "Come on, it's just a room," I said, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "Let's check it out." We spread out, examining the room. I found an old journal on a shelf, its pages yellowed and brittle. The entries were written by a doctor who had worked there, detailing the experiments he had conducted on the patients. The more I read, the more horrific it became. The patients were subjected to electroshock therapy, lobotomies, and other cruel procedures. "Guys, you need to see this," I called out, but when I turned around, I was alone. Panic surged through me. Mike? Jenna? Sam? Lisa? No response. I shone my flashlight around, but the room was empty. My friends were gone. I ran back into the corridor, calling their names, but all I heard was the echo of my own voice. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if mocking me. I retraced my steps, trying to find the way back to our camp, but the corridors seemed to shift and change, leading me in circles. My flashlight flickered, and in its dim light, I saw shadows moving just beyond my reach. I was not alone. Fear gripped me as I stumbled through the dark, my breath coming in short gasps. I turned a corner and found myself back in the operating room. The journal was gone, replaced by a sheet of paper with a single sentence scrawled in blood. "You can't leave." Desperation clawed at me as I bolted for the stairs, only to find them blocked by a heavy iron gate that hadn't been there before. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, and I could feel eyes watching me from the shadows. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and I could see my breath fogging the air. The chains on the ceiling clinked together, and I felt a cold hand brush against my neck. I spun around, but there was no one there. "Please, let me out!" I screamed, banging on the gate, but it was useless. I was trapped. Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity. The whispers never stopped, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. I was on the verge of giving up when I heard a familiar voice. "Alex, where are you?" It was Mike. I followed his voice, tears streaming down my face. I found him in one of the corridors, looking as terrified as I felt. "Thank God," I sobbed, hugging him. "Where are the others?" "They're outside. We need to get out of here," he said, pulling me along. We stumbled through the maze of corridors, the whispers growing fainter with each step. Finally, we burst through the front doors and into the cold night air. The others were waiting, their faces pale with fear. "We thought we lost you," Jenna said, hugging me tightly. "We need to leave now," Mike said, his voice shaking. We didn't need to be told twice. We ran to the car and sped away, not looking back until the asylum was a distant silhouette against the night sky. We never spoke about what happened that night. We agreed to forget, to move on, but the memories lingered. Every New Year's Eve, I hear the whispers in my dreams, reminding me of the terror we faced. The asylum may be abandoned, but its spirits are not. They're waiting, watching, ready to claim the next unsuspecting soul who dares to disturb their rest. New Year's Eve was supposed to be a night of celebration, a night where we let go of the past and embraced the future. For me, it became a night of terror that I can never forget. It all started when my sister Emily invited me to join her and her friends at a remote cabin in the woods. Emily and I had always been close, and it seemed like a great way to bond and start the new year together. The cabin belonged to her boyfriend, Jason, and it was the perfect getaway from the city. Isolated, surrounded by dense forest, and far from any cell signal. We arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon, the sun setting behind the trees casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. Besides Emily and Jason, there were two other friends, Sarah and Mark. The cabin was cozy, with a roaring fire in the hearth and the scent of pine lingering in the air. As night fell, we settled in with drinks and snacks, sharing stories and laughter. Midnight approached, and we decided to play a game of truth or dare to pass the time. The dares started off silly, jumping into the snow barefoot, eating strange combinations of food, but then Mark dared Emily to summon a spirit. We all laughed, thinking it was a joke. Emily, never one to back down from a challenge, accepted. She grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, drawing a crude Ouija board. We all gathered around the coffee table, placing our fingers on a makeshift planchette, a shot glass turned upside down. "Is there anyone here with us?" Emily asked, her voice half serious. At first, nothing happened. We all chuckled nervously, but then the glass began to move. It was slow at first, then faster, sliding across the paper with a will of its own. We exchanged uneasy glances, but continued. "Who are you?" Emily asked. The glass spelled out a name, Anna. "Anna, what do you want?" Jason asked, his bravado faltering. "Help me," the glass spelled out. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the air growing colder. We all felt it, a presence, something dark and desperate. I wanted to stop, to throw the paper into the fire and end the game, but Emily pressed on. How can we help you, Anna? Find me, came the reply. Before we could ask more, the glass shot off the table, shattering against the wall. The fire flickered wildly, and a sudden gust of wind howled through the cabin, despite all the windows being shut. Panic set in, and we decided to end the game and go to bed. I couldn't sleep. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling, the events of the night replaying in my mind. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, a faint sobbing coming from outside. I thought it was my imagination, but the sobbing grew louder, more insistent. I got up and looked out the window. The forest was dark, the moon casting a pale light on the snow. There was no one in sight, but the sobbing continued, echoing through the trees. I shook Emily awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. She listened, her face growing pale. "It's coming from the woods," she said. We woke the others, and despite our fear, curiosity got the better of us. Bundling up in our coats and boots, we grabbed flashlights and ventured outside. The sobbing grew louder as we approached the tree line, leading us deeper into the forest. "Anna?" Emily called out. "Is that you?" The sobbing stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. We stood there, our breaths visible in the cold air, listening. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. A young girl no older than 10, wearing a tattered dress. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her skin was pale, almost translucent. "Help me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you Anna?" Emily asked. The girl nodded. "I'm lost. I've been lost for so long." "How can we help you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Follow me," she said, turning and walking deeper into the woods. We followed, our flashlights illuminating the path ahead. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees like skeletal hands reaching out. The girl led us to a clearing where an old well stood, its stones covered in moss and ice. "Down there," she said, pointing to the well. "What's down there?" Mark asked, his voice quivering. "My bones," she replied. "Please set me free." We hesitated, fear gripping us, but the girl's sorrowful eyes compelled us to act. Jason and Mark found a length of rope in the cabin, and we lowered it into the well. Jason, being the strongest, volunteered to go down. He disappeared into the darkness, the rope the only link between us. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. Finally, Jason called up. "I found something. It looks like bones." We pulled him up, and sure enough, he held a small skeleton wrapped in a decaying dress. The girl watched, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her form fading. "You've set me free." The sobbing stopped, and a sense of peace settled over the clearing. We buried the bones in a shallow grave, marking it with stones. As we made our way back to the cabin, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees, we felt a weight lift from our shoulders. We never spoke of that night again, but every New Year's Eve, I remember the girl in the woods, lost and alone, and the promise we made to set her free. The past can haunt us, but sometimes we can make things right. Sometimes we can bring peace to the restless souls who wander in the darkness.